so they'll pick up any questions and we can toss those around either during the session or at the end. And then I'll tell you what, at the end of this kind of run through, I'm going to give, you know, what I'm going to do for you in terms of sharing information. So as I said before, my name is Gemma. I'm the Senior HR Consultant for the Kingswood Group. We are a specialist HR recruitment consultancy, and we deal with everything from entry level up to board level. Plus, we also run desks for office recruitment and finance recruitment. So again, everything from entry level up to board level. We have a small but beautifully formed HR consultancy and outsourcing team, which comprises myself and my lovely colleague Holly, who isn't joining us today, unfortunately. And we look after numbers of organisations across Essex and other home counties into London, and also a little further afield into Europe, with everything relating to people and people management. I try to, although we call it HR, it's really much broader than HR. So it could be anything that relates to the managing of people and how they want to do that. So the session is being recorded. I hope Julie's going to nod at me now. Yeah, she is. Yeah. And can I just check, Julie, from a thumbs up, are you able to let people into the chat? You are, so I don't have to keep clicking away. Fantastic, that's great. One less thing for me to have to worry about. You know, it's like that tapping your head and rubbing your tummy thing. Not always that good at that coordination stuff. The session is being recorded. We will get that out to everybody. It will probably be via our YouTube channel. I will also be able to share with you a copy of the model resolution policy, which you can use and adapt to yourselves, and also some links to some really useful websites that you can go to extract information, or just for general interest in reading if you're not actually planning on implementing this at this particular moment in time. So could I ask you, first activity of the day, really, before I go waffling on, is could you just put into the chat the words that spring to mind when you think about workplace grievance? Yep, complaints, absolutely. Risk, of course. Yeah, dissatisfaction. Yeah, complaints, disagreement, stress for everybody, including HR. Yeah, time consuming, upsetting staff, process heavy, no one ends up satisfied. Anything else? Expensive, of course. Yeah, time is money in business. You know, an hour spent on managing an aspect of grievance, and we all know that grievances don't take an hour to deal with. It's multiples of hours. Every hour for every person has a cost attached to it. Scared of the outcome, causes more problems than it solves. Absolutely. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Damages relationships, you know, yeah, keep them coming. You know, all of these things and more. What I haven't seen is it's a worthwhile activity. It's a necessary evil. It's an unnecessary evil, actually, I would challenge. But it's something that, you know, benefits everybody. It doesn't take up a lot of our time. It gets positive outcomes. It makes everybody feel really great about themselves and about everybody else. And it really encourages us all to want to come to work every day to do the work that we do, whether we are the complainant, the subject of the complaint, the people around the edges of the complaint, or indeed the HR or ER team who get saddled with having to deal with it. So when I started this process originally back in, oh my God, let me think, 2012 was the first time that I'd heard about alternative dispute resolution. Was when I went to the Law Society and I heard a talk from a chap called David Liddell, who is the chief exec of an organisation called the TCM Group. And TCM Group then at the time were very much a mediation company. And he had come up with this concept of resolution as an alternative to grievance, which was unheard of at that time. There were very few companies who were really involved in this in any great way, shape or form. I was massively inspired because I was working for a care home company, a group of care homes, 26 care homes across the UK. And there had been, and I'd only been there about 6-8 weeks, and I had identified that there was a massive grievance culture. You know, anybody who wasn't happy raise a grievance, and then the person against who you raise the grievance then becomes unhappy and then raises a counter grievance, and so it went on and on and on. And with a team of 3, it was an impossibility to stay on top of everything that was going on. So I was very inspired by what I heard back with David, but I wasn't actually in the space to be able to jump into it and ditch absolutely everything that we were doing. So what I created was a sort of a hybrid of what David had been talking about and what I had kind of thought might be acceptable to our organisation, our board, and also our employee reps union members. So it was a sort of a hybrid, if you like, policy for the organisation. And when I was going through that process, what I identified, and I did exactly as we've just done this morning, but I went out and I spoke to the team members and said, okay, tell me what grievance means to you. What are the words? What does it mean in essence to you? And they came up with all the same sorts of things that you did. But the definition of grievance is that it's a means, in my view, and it is my view, and it's a view that's shared now by larger and growing numbers of people, is that it encourages retribution over resolution. It's a adversarial, retributive process which actually does not seek to resolve the problem. It seeks to get to an outcome that can kind of tick a box, basically. Either the person's guilty or they're not guilty, and they progress on to some other form of activity, or they don't. And most grievances that I dealt with in that time were kind of what I call the he said, she said type arguments. You know, somebody's done something to somebody else and they've made a complaint, or there's been a conflict, a personality clash, or whatever you want to call it, between parties. And we kind of go through the grievance process and we go, okay, you know, yeah, Fred, you know, you did say to Gemma that she was, you know, a twit. You know, please don't do that again, or further, we're going to take you to a disciplinary. And by the way, can you all just go back and get on with it now, you know, and start working together productively? And funnily enough, it just doesn't seem to happen, you know. Well, no shock there. So the root of the word in grievance is grief, you know, so why do we expect it to be anything other than grief? So, you know, dictionary definition, you know, harm, injury, misfortune, trouble, suffering, agony, sorrow. Not exactly words that make you feel inspired and want to get up and do a great job, and to cause any and for the grievance to cause anything other than pain and anguish should not therefore come as a bit of a shock to us. But when I looked at resolution and how specifically around the use of mediation in the workplace, and I mean mediation not just in a capital M kind of mediation like formal mediation, but mediating between people with differences of opinions, with complaints, conflicts and concerns, small m mediation. The words that I was getting back from that when I was doing my research was to loosen, to unyoke, to undo, to explain, to relax or set free, or to dispel. Now, which of us would not want to be set free from something that is making us unhappy? So for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer to go to my board and say, look, let me try this, because this has got to be something that's better for us than what we're currently doing. And against which they said, yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic, Gemma, but, you know, why would we? And how much is it going to cost us? And that's where, you know, you get into the preparation stages. But before I go there, I need to just sort of remind everybody, as if anybody in the team needs reminding, because I'm sure you're all perfectly aware, but the 2007 Gibbons review of the dispute resolution recommended workplace mediation as a primary area of focus, which took until 2009 for Acas to then add that to their code of practice. And I would say to everybody, go and have a look at the Acas code of practice for disciplinary and grievance and see if you can find it in any kind of structured format. It's basically a couple of lines about informal resolution and the use of mediation, but it's rather sort of, you know, it's in there and you're skipping over that straight into grievance. So even Acas's code of practice doesn't actually encourage anybody, if that's what they were working on, to really embrace resolution and mediation to resolution as a viable option. Now, the government had said at the time, and I'll read it out because it's quite a wordy thing, and it said, in the context of rising employment tribunal volumes, a government enthusiastically endorsed the use of mediation and most strikingly argued that a significant growth in mediation of workplace disputes has the potential to lead to major and dramatic shifts in the culture of employment relations. Now, that is a statement that was made in 2011. And what has happened since then? You know, there are small pockets of activity. Lots of organisations have kind of tried to do things, and some are doing these in brilliant, you know, some of the NHS trusts are really embracing this now. But mostly when we are dealing with complaints, concerns and disputes in the workplace, we all go back to the Acas code of practice and go straight into a grievance, which doesn't really kind of say that we are really making this major and dramatic shift in the culture of employee relations. We're kind of sticking to safe territory. And if it is so good, then why aren't companies doing it? So why do you think companies aren't, you know, again, throw it into the chat. Why do you think businesses aren't engaging with alternative dispute resolution or mediation, resolution through mediation as an option? What do you think stops us as businesses? The skill set, yeah, habit, absolutely. Change is hard work. It certainly is. If you've ever tried to fold your arms one way and then get told to fold them the other way, feel how awkward that is. Path of least resistance is just carry on doing what you've always been doing. Yeah, cost. Added the risk to ET level. Very interesting. We'll come back to that one. Fear of added visible costs as opposed to lengthy time costs and grievances can be less visible. Yeah, if you know, what do they say? If you can manage it, if you can measure it, you can manage it. If you're not measuring it, how the hell do you know how much time it's taking you and how much it's costing you? The fear of it not being seen as objective, correct? Too informal. Interesting, yeah. Cool. Okay, so lots of reasons why people might not be doing it, all of which I would say phooey. You know, in the nicest possible way. Thank you for sharing, but phooey nonetheless, because I was exactly the same. You know, I've been an HR person for a very long time. The only thing I've ever really known in that, you know, dispute management activity was it's either a grievance, it's been a complaint, a concern or a conflict that's come out at work, and then we deal with it as a grievance complaint. We might have had a little bit of a conversation with the person at first saying, you know, do you really want to take it forward as a grievance? And they say yes, and we go, okay, fine, no problem. And then it grows all the arms and legs that these things tend to do. Or it's a disciplinary matter because it's conduct, or it's a capability matter. Now, you know, the most forward-thinking organisations now are moving away from just the initial 3 C's of concerns, complaints and conflict, and are moving into the other 2 C's of conduct and capability. We're not talking about conduct and capability today, but after today's event, I'm quite happy to talk to people about that as well. But today we're going to focus on those 3 C's. And for all the reasons that people have said, you know, yeah, yes, it's all of those things. You know, is it going to be more expensive? Is it going to leave us more exposed? Is it too informal? Will it get the results? And so, well, what are you doing at the moment? You're using grievance, and how is that working out for everybody? You know, is that creating cost efficiencies? Is it impacting positively on productivity? Does it have an effect or no effect? Grievance, does that have an effect on how people feel when they come to work? So you get either presenteeism or absenteeism as a result of grievances. And what I would say is the fear of what if it doesn't work is perhaps the default position for all the reasons that we've said above. But all we're doing really with a grievance is that we're just kicking the can down the road. And, you know, the problem is often not resolved within that grievance activity itself. You know, the conflict, the complaint, the falling out, the dispute, the concerns that have been raised. Often those aren't resolving the people feeling, the people emotion that drove those people to bring that complaint forward in the first place. And all we do is we suppress it, we mask it up in some other process, and then we say, okay, you know, let's just deal with this formally. Grievances have an impact on everything: productivity, engagement, attrition, and by default then customer and client experience. So if you're working, as I was, in a care home environment, you know, disputes between staff members working within a care home it directly impacted the quality of care often that was being given to the resident, because people would go off sick, we'd have to bring in agency staff, and agency staff don't know the residents got a poorer life experience because of it, and everything has a cost. So making the leap from where we were to where we needed to be was something that I was really passionate about. Again, another piece of information for you. In May 2021, I don't know if anybody's read this yet, it's the Saundry and Irwin report that was done for Acas, which was called Estimating the Cost of Workplace Conflict. And this was a piece of research that they did, Richard Saundry under Sheffield Management School and Peter Irwin for the Centre for Employment Research at the University of Westminster. And they undertook this research project, and it's been published through the Acas website, where they estimated that the cost for UK PLC of workplace disputes is 28.5 billion a year. Let me just run that number by you again, 28.5 billion. Now, this is pre-pandemic, so we've probably seen an increase in that now, but that at the time, which was in 2021, May 21, that was the equivalent of about £1,000 per employee. CIPD was involved in that project, and with their input, they calculated that close on 10 million people experience conflict at work. And of those, over half suffered stress, anxiety and depression as a result, which led to absenteeism. Over 900,000 took time off work as a result of that, and nearly 500,000 resigned, and more than 300,000 were dismissed. Now, if anybody can tell me that that is the best way for us to go forward in terms of, you know, our workplace, managing our workplace disputes, I'm happy to be told differently. But it suggested that there was strong evidence to support that early intervention in conflict saved time, saved money, and it promoted better well-being for people who work within the organisation. If you're an HR organisation like we are, well, we are committed to our values and we are committed to the well-being of the people who work within our organisation, the Kingswood Group, then anything that promotes better well-being has got to be something that you've got to look at more seriously. So what do you have to do about it? Well, it isn't a massive piece of work, and what it is at the beginning, you know, like anything, everything is front-loaded, you know, but in essence, by rewording and reworking your old grievance policy, introducing alternative dispute resolution approaches, you can shift your culture away from the one that encourages grievances, so, you know, which sets employee against employee or employee against employer, and it discourages grievances. It suppresses people from bringing things forward because they are fearful of what the impact might be. It moves that old school culture out of the door and allows people to come forward and talk about what is happening for them and to seek a resolution. Because ultimately, for the vast majority of people, and there are always exceptions to the rule, but they are in the minority, you know, the vexatious claimants and the habitual grievance raisers. But even the habitual grievance raisers, if they're offered the opportunity to go down the resolution pathway, it's very difficult for them to continuously say no without being seen as a vexatious claimant. So grievance cultures are almost always adversarial, they're retributive and counterproductive. By introducing a more human and humane way of dealing with conflict and concerns and complaints in the workplace, organisations are providing that alternative route that many employees would be willing to engage with, because it's more relationship centred, it's productive, and it generates positive and lasting results. So what are the steps? Well, the first thing, I'll just jump back actually, because one of the things that I was asked previously on a private message that came to me saying, yeah, I'm really interested in this, but what do I do? Do I just get rid of grievance altogether? And I said, well, you don't have to. You can keep grievance as a kind of thing in the back end of your policy, as you know, well, if all else fails, you've still got that. But I have been working in organisations now where we just didn't have a grievance policy anymore. It just doesn't exist. And the route to grievance doesn't exist anymore, because all disputes are dealt with through a resolution frame and through a resolution lens. So we are looking always. Doesn't mean to say that we can't investigate something, doesn't mean to say that we are not going to listen to people and that they don't have the right to be represented at a formal resolution meeting. Of course, they have all those rights, the same as everybody else does in a grievance. But the frame is not about seeking to apportion blame. blame, shame, name, shame and blame, but seeking to find a common ground between the parties that everybody would sign up to as being the way forward. So stages to transition, which is what you're all really keen to learn more about, are reasonably straightforward if you are, prepared to put in the graft up front, because most of it is an upfront, front-loaded activity. My personal experience of introducing resolution is don't do away with grievance at the get-go. Maybe, as I say, keep that in your back pocket at the back of your resolution policy, but everything should be geared within your communications and your approaches to dealing with things through that resolution lens. So the first thing is I've already said to you, what's the first thing that you need to do if you're going to think about introducing resolution? Well, you've got to know what your start point is. If you just go headlong into, we're going to have a new policy. Well, what are you trying to fix? You may not have a problem. You don't have an issue at all. And if you've got one grievance a year, or and they are small, and that's a small grievance and it's reasonably managed, then you may not need something like this. I would argue that everybody needs it, because even one is one too many. But what you can measure, you can manage. So what's your current culture in relation to complaints, conflicts and concerns, and how do you know what that is having an effect on your organization? So measuring, data mining, calculating costs, times and impacts. And those that could be really complicated. I don't do complicated. I'm a simple person. I think, simplicity, complex situations that you can deal with through simplicity is a much better way to go forward. So let's just take a standard grievance. If we say, there's a complainant, there's a subject, there is a manager, there is an HR person. So that's 4 people straight off the bat. There possibly are a couple of witnesses. So now you're up to 6. What's the average cost for hourly cost? So simple, take your payroll, divide it by your headcount, gives you an average cost for your organization. Nothing very scientific about it, because it doesn't need to be, because ultimately we're not going to be putting this forward for a Nobel Prize in mathematics. What we're trying to give is a ballpark figure, an indicative cost of how much it's costing to manage a single grievance. So if you take the average grievance will take, 3 days maybe, if you totted up all the hours, multiply by the numbers of people involved. So raising the grievance, holding the hearing, doing the witness statements, writing up the information, sending out all the invitations, doing all the preparation work, and in the meeting and then post meeting. If you add up all that time together, you'll come to a number of figures, and each figure can be attributed to an average cost, and that average cost then is multiplied across the number of grievances. And you can do that in whatever period of time you like, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24, 36, whatever you think is reasonable. When I was doing it, I took the 2 years prior to my joining the organization. And just as a FYI, the day I joined the organization, when I said, how many grievances have we got on the table today, apart from nobody could actually tell me, because it was all a bit kind of hit and miss. When we did do the number crunching, there were 21 grievances in flight. That was for an organization with a headcount of just around 2,000 with 26 sites. When I changed jobs and went to my second job, and I did the same process and said, how many in-flight grievances we had, there were 42. And I think I nearly wept at that point and said, well, this can't go on. We just can't do this. So what you can measure, you can manage. Do your data preparation beforehand. Getting that calculation together, particularly if you've got a board that needs to be persuaded of investment, because there is an investment that needs to be made in this in terms of training and development and a bit of marketing, which doesn't have to be massively expensive, but you do have to get out there and bang the drum for it. Also, what about your people? They are a real source of information for you. So ask them, if you've got employee surveys or you do pulse surveys, ask them what they think about the culture in relation to managing complaints, conflicts and concerns. Do they feel that it's positive? Get if you get 50% or 30% of people replying and saying, no, we think it's terrible, then you've got some really strong evidence there to say that what you're doing is no longer effective, and why would you keep doing that? So the first thing is what you can measure, you can manage. So do all your data analysis, gather all your information together, because you are going to need to present that at some point to your finance team or your board or whoever holds the purse strings. Discuss the benefits of resolution over grievance with relevant groups. If you have union representation, employee reps, the board, management, employees, get them together, talk about what we've been talking about today. You know, this is where we are, this is what it's costing us, this is what it looks like, this is where we're intending to go, and how we think it could work. But what do you think? Get their involvement, because early engagement is really important to getting buy-in to this. You know, if people don't know about it and they see it as an HR thing, then you're not going to get the same buy-in as if they have contributed to the build. Training is critical. Okay, and it doesn't have to be a qualification course. You don't have to go off and become a qualified mediator, or have people who are qualified mediators, although that is always a good benefit to offer to people and get them really involved in it. But they do need to know how to mediate. And even if they're not mediating capital M, they're mediating lowercase m, or as I would also call it, facilitating a conversation. So they are brokering a conversation between parties. They need to know how to manage that process from beginning to end, and doing that with confidence is something that's really important. The best way to do that mediation activity is to keep it in-house, but of course you can use external parties if it's felt to be you know, a more cost-effective way of doing it, because you don't get many. You know, why train up a load of people if you're rarely ever going to get anything to mediate? Most companies have disputes that they need to address. So, you know, maybe you can set up training programs, as I did for managers, you know, how to facilitate a conversation between 2 or 3 or more parties that are in dispute. Creating communities of practice. That was something that I was really passionate about, you know, particularly in organizations where we're all a bit scattered to the wind, being able to get people together so that they can talk about in confidence, not the specifics of the cases that they've been looking after, but the essence of the cases they've been looking after, and bounce ideas off other people who have been acting in the same role. Same as with investigation officers for disciplinaries. You know, having that community of practice with other IOs is really helpful, or other chairs or hearing appeal officers. It's always good to, you know, get that community of practice activity together. You can do trial runs on things and practice skills, and it's a really useful way of getting people engaged and energized about what they're doing. So ensuring managers and others are trained, making sure that they're not just trained in the skills of facilitating or mediating conversations, but also in some of the core subjects that will come up or that will trigger some of these complaints, concerns and conflicts, such as equality, diversity and inclusion, bullying and harassment, grievance itself, you know, so that they fundamentally understand the difference between a grievance and resolution. How to investigate capital I, investigate lowercase I. You know, I try to steer away from the investigation word if I'm just saying I'm just going to look into it. Sounds far less adversarial than I'm going to conduct an investigation, which sounds exactly like what it is, like you've got the police turning up. And having a written policy is not enough. That policy is just words on a page. You have to bring it to life for people. So having town halls, regular team meetings, group meetings, you know, promotion through your intranet or you know, staff meetings, notice boards, whatever you may have, you know, getting the word out there in a way that makes sense to people is really important. So that marketing and promotion of the service, and how do people access it, and, you know, is it confidential, and how's it going to work for me? If they don't understand it, if they don't know what to do, then guess what? They're just going to say, I'll just raise a grievance because I know what I'm doing there. You know, I just have to write the thing down and say I'm not happy, and that's it. Now, even if they were to do that, that doesn't mean to say all is lost, because as soon as you get that through the door, which, you know, there's always a transition period, you can set up what's called a triage system, which is what I had in my last 2 companies. And, you know, you triage it exactly as if you were going to the hospital. Let's go through it. Let's have a look at the impact, the severity, the frequency, the desired outcome. And we can match that over and say, well, actually, you know, yeah, this is pretty serious stuff. We can go down this is no longer just a complaint. This is more serious than that. Perhaps it's a discriminatory activity. That doesn't mean to say that you can't still use mediation as a way of addressing the issue, though. And this does make a bit of a leap of faith for people, because I know people say, oh my God, yeah, but what about employment tribunals? I'm a member of the Employment Appeals Tribunal. And I can tell you from the employer side, when I'm on the bench, if I've heard that people have gone through a mediation or a resolution framework, my heart is lifted, because I know that they are trying to do everything they can to avoid this getting to the formal stages. And most employment tribunal judges are now switching on to this. And in fact, my one and only case that went to tribunal in the 6.5 years I was working for my last employer, actually the judge cited the fact that we had used informal resolution as a means to try and resolve the problems as a positive in our favour. So I don't think it's something that organisations should be fearful of, because it is something that is now going to start to be more encouraged, because going to tribunal is so expensive. It's so damaging for people, not just in terms of cost, but also personally as well. And they can drag on and on and on for years and years and years. So don't be afraid of using mediation or alternative dispute resolution as a way of addressing problems in the workplace. Most people, if you ask them what they want as an outcome, they'll say, I just want to come to work and do my job. I just don't want to feel stressed. I don't want to feel upset. I don't want to come to work and feel I'm fearful of what will happen to me. It will, going down a formal grievance route isn't going to change that, even if the person that they raised the complaint about ends up being dismissed. What happens when they encounter the next person? Because there's always going to be conflict and concerns and complaints within the workplace. And this is also not just addressing the problem, it's also equipping people with different tools, skill sets and competencies themselves to be able to deal with things in a better way and a more productive way. Finally, of course, once you have got your system up and running, as I did with both the companies that I introduced it to, it's no good just saying, okay, there we are, we've done it now. It's constantly measuring it back and reporting those outcomes back into the relevant groups, employees especially, because they're the ones that need to know that this system is working and it's working for them in their interest, but also the other organisation organisation groups like employee reps. Something weird has just popped up on my screen. I'm just going to get rid of that. Don't know what that is, something very odd. So employee representative groups or union members, regular meetings to check in how things are going, tap into how people are feeling about it. And because it's an iterative process, you can always change things if it needs to be smartened up in a couple of areas. Typically what would happen is that somebody contacts them. This, the day that I knew that it had worked, it for want of a better expression, was the day that we had our first employee phone up and say, I'd like to put in a request for resolution. And my HR colleague nearly fell off his chair, because we'd never heard anybody use that language before. It was always, I want to raise a grievance and I want to complain about so and so. And and we were working in an organisation of about 1,300 people, multicultural, different languages, different shift patterns, different levels, and the chance of disputes building up were very, very high. It was a hospitality organisation, so it just seemed to be a bit rife in that space. So the first time we got that, I want to put in a request for resolution. We all just sort of sat there slightly open mouthed for a few minutes and went, yes, of course you do. Well, why would we expect anything else, And that took I started in the January 2015. And by the end of 2015, there was no grievance policy. That had gone and the resolution policy was in place. All the outstanding grievances had been dealt with by the beginning of 2016, and then from mid-2016 up until 2020, when the pandemic hit, we didn't have a single grievance, not one. Everything was dealt with through resolution. and we would triage the issues as they came through. We would take a scoring system, very light touch scoring system, to see, how regular it was. We would talk to the individual at length about what was happening for them, and we would use a really simple model. Tell us your story, tell us the impact, what do you need, and what's your goals for this? And that model allowed them to really think for the first time, what do they actually want? They might say, oh, I want them fired, and say, okay, well, fired's one outcome, and if that isn't possible, what else could we look at? How do you want to feel by the end of this? What would a good day for you feel like? Getting them connected to what's driven them in the first place, which is really, a lot of it is based around emotion and how they feel about that. So that sort of is a bit of I'm kind of conscious of time. I want to leave time for questions. That was a bit of a run through. The model resolution policy, as I said, we will get out to everybody, and also some of the links, like the CIPD links for the Saundry and Irwin report, the Acas Saundry and Irwin, and also the CIPD did a really neat piece of work around workplace mediation and how that's transforming culture of conflict. So we can get all those lovely websites out to you. Obviously, from our point of view, from a Kingswood point of view, we are very passionate about getting the word out. I'm going to be doing a proper webinar. I'm not sure if this is a proper webinar or an improper webinar. That's probably the wrong choice of language, but we're going to be doing a more formal webinar for people in September. So you're more than welcome to jump into that again and hear me talking about other things related to the dispute resolution. But if you just want to bounce a few ideas off, or if you need any help in getting any of these things, you've got the passion, you've got the desire, but you just don't know how to get it off the ground, we're more than happy to come along and help out. There's always that opportunity to have a kind of a no commitment informal chat, and then explore whether that's something that you would want us to be more alongside you on. And I've just seen a question that says, do you include reference to the resolution policy in your contract of employment where disciplinary is in? So in the policies, in the contracts that we issue to our clients and also that we issue for ourselves, we talk about disciplinary capability and grievance as being things that are available to people, but that we do use an informal resolution approach as part of the, so yes, in essence we do, but we still mention we still have the other words mentioned. When you go to the handbooks that we create and the policies that we create, because we can't impose the removal of grievance on companies who are still wedded to that, because we service their needs rather than servicing our own, then we would talk to them about the introduction of informal performance management or informal resolution. And I've sort of snuck it in. Don't tell Sarah, she's not listening. No, she is listening. But I've sort of snuck it in at the beginning of the disciplinary policy. So I now have a whole section around informal performance management, which is around meetings of concerns, which, guess what, is all about conversation and dialogue. And then also at the beginning of the grievance policy, because some companies still want that there, I've put in another big section in there about informal resolution through mediation or facilitating conversations. So yes, but not directly with clients that haven't actually requested it, because it's not something that they particularly want. For ourselves, we do. Okay, so I'm going to shut up now, and then I think you can unmute yourself and ask any questions that you want, or pop it into the chat as you wish. Stunned silence.
Everyone's shy.
Everyone's shy. Okay. So if I can just jump back to the ET part, then I think while we're waiting for people to kind of come up with a few questions, added risk at ET level. So again, as I've explained, that was one of the biggest concerns that my then directors had, when I was working for the care provider in the care company, was that we would get hit with more and more employment tribunals because we were taking away something from people. And I said, but we're not taking anything away at all. What we're doing is we are increasing the choice. And, you know, increasing a choice doesn't diminish what is effectively a sort of an alternative route to sometimes the same end. You know, you said something to me which made me really unhappy, and I need that to be resolved. You know, well, that's no different to raising a grievance. It's just how you come at it is quite different. You know, if you for the first, you know, if that had happened to me and somebody had said something and I'd just raised a grievance, the other person said, well, I didn't even know, I didn't intend to offend them. That wasn't my intention. That wasn't what I wanted to do. And oh no, but intention's not, it doesn't matter about intention, you know, and it becomes very confrontational, retributive. We're going to name you and blame you and shame you. Whereas if we'd say, well, actually, how about we get you together and sit down and for the first time, listen to what the other person has to say. You know, when you said that to me, this is how I felt. I did a mediation between three parties in a local authority. I think we'll just leave that hanging there for the moment. And it had been going on for about 8 months or so. And the mediator, so I was sort of there as an observation, in an observation capacity. And the mediator was kind of holding the room, and we'd done all the preparation beforehand. This was all during the kind of Zoomy days when, you know, meeting up with people was all a bit hit and miss. Lots of mediations were done online. Didn't affect the outcomes of that at all. But obviously face to face is good. And you know, everybody was very entrenched. They'd all been in their own camp saying, I'm right, they're wrong, they need to be punished for this. They need, you know, I need my day in court. I'm going to go public. I'm going to go and, you know, really kind of, you know, bang the drums on this one. And I love Joanne's cat's tail wafting through the video. I think that's amazing. Thank you for that. I love a cat tail. Who doesn't love a cat tail? And one of the parties then said, well, you know, when we talked about how did that make you feel when this happened, and he sat very quietly. He had been quite aggressive throughout the process, I think it's safe to say, and he sat there very quietly and he said, at the height of it, I got in my car and I drove to a local wood with a piece of rope, and I was going to hang myself. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I couldn't take the pain, the suffering. And he said it was only the fact that his son called him that he turned around and came home again. And the other two gentlemen who had been, you know, I want my day in court. I want, you know, apologies written in tablets of stone. I want this man punished beyond all punishment, sat in sort of absolute stunned silence and said, we just didn't know. Now, that one moment, sort of that hinging moment, just pivoted everything. Now, I don't say they ran off like holding hands and dancing through daisies, but they all went off for a cup of tea at the end, vowing to work more collaboratively and with more heart and more humanely towards each other in the future. And that's three opposing political parties reaching a kind of common agreement of how they're going to go forward and how they're going to work. And more importantly, if that starts to break down, what they're going to do about it. So everything is possible, is what I'm saying. Sarah.
We've got some messages.
Okay, so it says, in the event the employee raises a formal grievance in writing, would it be appropriate to tell them our intention is to deal with it? Well, okay, so I'll spin that around. Would you like someone to tell you that we're not going to deal with your grievance, we're going to do it in the other way? Possibly wouldn't use the word tell. Maybe you can just offer it to them. Explain things out to them. You know, what's the benefit? If you haven't yet gone down the policy route and it's something that you want to introduce, and you can have that conversation with the person, which is really where we all started off in my two companies, is, you know, I've written we've had a letter of complaint or a grievance that's been raised. We sit the person down and say, tell us about it. You know, tell us what happened. Tell us your story. What impact did that have on you? What did that make you feel like? What would make you feel better? You know, if you were to wake up tomorrow and it was all resolved, what would that feel like for you? And, you know, we can go down the grievance route, but how about we try this? You know, you have to agree to it. Of course, it's voluntary and the other party has to agree to it. But if you can both come together and talk about what's going on for you and find a way of solving the problem between you with our help. Would you like to give that a go? Because if it doesn't work, don't worry, you've always got the other route. And even if they say no, as part of your grievance outcomes, always include mediation as a recommendation to the problem. So you can do it at the beginning, or you can do it at the end and loop it back in. But that's one way to do it. I think probably telling people that they can't do it, maybe in the early stages, is maybe not the right way. But you know, in due course, when you don't have grievance as a route, why not? Yeah. It is voluntary. If they affirm they want to go through the formal route, like I said, then yeah, absolutely. Say, okay, we can take this through a formal route, but you do know that one of the outcomes will always be mediation. So do you think it might be worth trying that first? And if they say no, so that's fine, it will be included at the end. Now, it is voluntary. You can't force people to do this stuff. I know some companies that I worked with, and before I came to work with Kingswood, were removing the voluntary element to it. I'm not, the jury's out for me a bit on that at the moment. I wasn't sure that that was necessarily the right way to do things, but you know, I'm happy to be proven wrong on that one. So there's another one here that says refocusing on grievance policy. Love the idea of changing the title and costing it out. Great, fantastic. That's Vicky. Yeah, definitely. You know, cost it out. Make the case. You know, if people are bothered about money, if your board are interested in money, tell them how much it's costing them just to manage one. I think even one of them, one set of figures will probably be enough to upset them. But you know, if you've had half a dozen grievances in the last year, and they've all been pretty grim, you know, use those. You know, just cost them out. They don't, as I said, it doesn't have to be scientific. It just has to be a good estimate at what it's cost. Does the resolution policy fulfill the need of having a grievance procedure? So required by law. Now, the law doesn't require you to have a grievance procedure. It requires you to have a way of resolving disputes. Acas is a code of practice. It's not legislative. It's a, you know, you have to have a good reason not to follow a route to resolving conflicts, concerns and disputes in the workplace, and that's what resolution offers. If in the first instance you're still nervous about removing grievance, then don't remove it. Leave it at the back. Leave it as the back pocket option. If the informal route, the resolution approach isn't successful or is not required, the person chooses that they don't want to, go forward on it. I dealt with a situation in another company, as I said before I joined Kingswood, where the person turned up at the mediation and said, yeah, well, I'm only a bit like, the Acas early conciliation thing, I'm only doing this because I have to. Well, that doesn't, you have to sign an agreement to get involved in mediation. And that says, I'm doing this voluntarily and I'm doing it because I am genuinely invested in finding positive outcome. Someone who turns up on the first day of mediation says, yeah, I'm only doing it because, I've got to tick the box because I'm going to put in an employment tribunal. You're not going to get anywhere with someone like that. They've already made up their mind. It doesn't stop me from trying, or it didn't stop me from trying. But, those people aren't there because they have a vested interest in trying to find a resolution. They're actually just there to tick a box. So by keeping grievance there, you've always got that alternative path if you absolutely need it. Always try mediation, that's good. It never seems to be acceptable to very unionised staff. Funnily enough, no. And also, I tell you, the other groups that are also sometimes slightly reluctant to get involved, although they are a lot more getting switched onto it, are legal teams, because they see, risk at around every corner, and so the thought of using an informal resolution approach to what perhaps is quite a contentious conflict situation between parties makes some people incredibly nervous. But I can tell you, what is it? It's having conversation and dialogue. Where is the fear in having conversation and dialogue that could resolve matters and everybody comes away feeling positive about it? And it isn't, as I said, it isn't sort of skipping and holding hands and skipping through daisies. It's blooming hard work doing a mediation. If anyone's ever done one, you're in the room and it's flipping hard work. And the people who work the hardest, and not the mediators, thank God, it's the people who are in dispute, because they have to go through that cycle of activity to be able to get to a place where they can say, we're now ready to move on and find a common agreement. And it's their agreement. It's not my agreement as a mediator, and it's not the company's agreement. It's their agreement. What are they prepared to sign up to? A bit like arbitration and conciliation in unionized disputes. What are they prepared to sign up to that makes sense for them, that they can manage and maintain for themselves without anybody else getting involved? Thank you very much, Jason. Workplace mediation training, how to bring it into the workplace. Yeah, absolutely. Having the training is fantastic. I cannot advocate for it more, whether you do that through, one provider or another. And I wouldn't suggest, said you choose who you do your training with, but it certainly helps to have that training to get that understanding. But the principles are always the same. It's bringing people together into a safe space, enabling them to talk to each other and listen, really importantly, and to reach a point where they can start to move away from the problem into the solution.
That's the thing. I've been on the training, and the will has always been there to avoid grievances. But then it's like, well, what do you do with these new skills, and how do you actually bring that into the workplace? And looking at a grievance policy and saying, how do I adapt this, or do I have a new policy, or how? So you've covered some really useful things for me. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, as I said, when we send the stuff out, hopefully it will make even more sense. I tried to put together a bit of a guide on how to do it. It's quite difficult to put a guide together on how to do it because there's so many moving parts and each organisation is so different. But hopefully you'll be able to get a bit of an essence of it. And as I said, we're always around if you need to, get some more help in, even if it's just to do the front end, sort of the data mining and the discovery, to get a bit of thinking around that, or, engaging, I was working with a company and engaging with their board to shape up the policy, so the model policy, they wanted to say, we'll take the bones of that, but we want to put different things into it. And that's fine, providing it's not becoming more complex than it needs to be, because actually it is a simple process. It is about conversation and dialogue and listening and somebody, the mediator, just there holding that space for people so that they can, for the very first time, express what's happening to them, how that's making them feel, and what they would like to see differently. And for the other party to hear that and say, actually, from my perspective, this is what is happening for me and how I'm feeling. And sometimes people just sit there and say, my God, I didn't realize, like the three men in the, I was going to say 3 men in the boat, but the 3 men in the meeting room for the local authority, the 3 different parties, they'd never heard each other's stories ever. They were so entrenched, and this had been going on for over a year. I mean, it was about 18 months they'd been in this, and it was the lawyers were involved and the press were involved and the senior politicians were involved. It was a real mess. And they're supposed to be coming together to run a local authority and a community services, and thinking you can't even talk to each other without wanting to throw stones at each other's heads. How are you going to work out in the field with the community? And it had got really messy, really messy, sort of things being thrown at people's houses and cars being damaged, and just awful. And you think, well, how on earth could you come back from that? But they did, and they did it. We didn't do it. We just held the space and facilitated the conversation, and they did the rest themselves. So yeah, I'm with you, Jason. I think it's a powerful tool, and I think it's one that we are not using as much as we should.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think we're nearly out of time.
Okay, right. Well, it's according to mine, it's 13:58, and we did say that we'd finish at 2. So thank you so much for jumping on. I hope you've got something out of it, even if it's just hearing me warbling on about this stuff. You can tell from it that I am an absolute passionate advocate for this stuff. It ain't rocket science at the end of the day, but I think sometimes we look at these things from an HR or an employment law or an employee, ER perspective and think, God, it's too big a mountain to climb. But, it really isn't. It really isn't. Once you get going on it, you will become as passionate and enthusiastic about it as I am. And then you'll be boring everyone to death and doing webinars about this stuff. But if you do need our help, please do, just reach out to us. I think contact details are behind me on the wall, and also Julie, and then Julie with her technical wizardry, and thank God she's online because I wouldn't be able to do that. Would like links that we can train managers for this. Yeah, I can certainly pop some links into there. We don't tend to recommend training providers because obviously everybody chooses their own, but you know, FYI, Acas do mediation training. It does what it says on the tin, but it's training, it's not a qualification. There are other companies that will give you you know, a qualification, so it's sort of at an MVQ type level. And there are all sorts of different companies that can provide that. So yeah, you know, we will certainly send out the links to you that I talked about earlier in the presentation, and the copy of the policy. So without further ado, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and I'll look forward to speaking to some of you, perhaps on the HR Ninja site or at some other event at some point in the future.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye, everyone.